welcome. We're going to start, and I think people will trickle in. Couple new faces at least. Obviously, you know Swami. This is our fourth talk, and we're just really glad to have him here. And we'll finish the discussion on consciousness, and I think today's going to be a little bit more storytelling. And
a little bit more
on the lineage.
Yes.
Anyway, welcome. And this will all be on YouTube, so you can watch it again. Yeah, you bet.
All right, as usual, let's start with a chant. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suray Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Netapaharini. Good to be back here. The last 3 times, what I spoke about was more of classical Vedanta, what you would call hardcore Vedanta in the United States. But today it's going to be more of storytelling, a little bit about how it all came to the West. The effect of Eastern philosophy on our modern civilization, especially in the United States, you don't have to look very far. You don't have to look further than Star Wars or the Matrix or the yoga schools, which you find, I think, almost in every city and every suburb in the United States, or in the Indian philosophy departments in the different universities. And of course, there's a big Indian diaspora now, growing diaspora in the last 20 or 30 years. But it all started more than 100 years ago, 125 years ago, actually, to be precise. This is the 125th anniversary of that occasion, 1893. And believe it or not, on September 11th, in 1893, it's remarkable, the coincidence. There was a World Parliament of Religions, and the delegate from Hinduism, virtually unknown at that time, a young monk, he was what, 28 to 29 years old. He stood up to speak, and he started with Sisters and Brothers of America, received a standing ovation, and he spoke about the harmony of religions and peace, about acceptance and not tolerance, acceptance. He said it's why tolerance, acceptance, harmony, not only of each person having his or her own way, but also learning from each other and enriching our own paths by learning from others. He started off by saying that he's a Hindu and coming to talk about Hinduism for the first time in the West. But he said that, would I want that Christians or others would become Hindus? He said, God forbid. That he said, what I want is a Christian should become a better Christian, a Buddhist should be a better Buddhist, a Muslim a better Muslim, and a Hindu a better Hindu. And we learn from each other and we grow. So he gave this speech, and he was an instant success. And so from that time onwards, it sort of opened the doors to a succession of teachers, yoga teachers, meditation teachers, Buddhist lamas, philosophers, a different kind, and of course the Vedanta, the particular philosophy which Vivekananda brought also to the West. And so it started then, and it's continuing even now. Come, yes, come. Okay. Even here, and especially in New York, if you see the ISKCON, the Hare Krishna people, or just tomorrow I think is going to be a talk in the Open Center by Phil Goldberg about Paramahamsa Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi, that book. Yeah, he's going to give a talk. He's written a new book about Paramahamsa Yogananda. So all of them, in fact, Yogananda comes from the very place Vivekananda came from, the same city, almost the same neighborhood. So all of that started with Vivekananda. We're talking about the story of Vivekananda today, and we'll lead into the teachings also. So who was he? And his story is really fascinating. Quite apart from his significance to the spread of Eastern religion and spirituality and yoga and all of that in the West, he's really big in India. He's a major figure. He's probably the most important spiritual teacher in the last 200-300 years. And that's saying something in a place like India, which is full of spiritual teachers. Once Vivekananda was here, I think in Denver or somewhere, he's going to speak at a church. And those who have written the reminiscences, this lady she was a young girl at that time, a college student. And somebody said that this speaker today, he is like a prophet of the Old Testament. And this girl is saying that, do they still have prophets today? And her friend said, In India, it's always the land of the time of the prophets. So you're always full of teachers. Even today, you have so many kinds of teachers there. But among all of them, and they would be the first to admit that Vivekananda towers above all of them the last, say, 200 years or so. So who was he and what do we get from him? A very sweeping look at his life. He was born Narendranath Datta. That was his pre-monastic name. When you become a monk, you get a name. So my name is Sarvapriyananda, but that's not my original name. That's not what my parents called me. When you become a monk, your name is changed. Your guru gives you a new name. So Vivekananda was actually Narendranath Datta, and he was born in the city of he spent his childhood and his college days in Calcutta. His dad was a wealthy lawyer, Vishwanath Datta, and he grew up with his younger brothers and sisters in a city that was at that time probably the most modern city in India, because remember at that time India was under the rule of the British, and the British had their capital in Calcutta before they shifted it to Delhi later on. So Calcutta was like the political capital of India. The British rulers were there, and because of the presence of the British, you had a tremendous Western influence coming for the first time into India and through Calcutta. And the people who felt it first were those who went to the new colleges and schools and universities being set up by these strange white folk from across the seas. The British set up an English system of education. So Vivekananda went through that. Narendranath, the young Narendranath, went through, or to keep it short, Naren, that was what he was called before he became a monk. Very inquisitive, and going through college, like it so happens, people become skeptics. He was spiritual by nature, but he also started asking questions that does God really exist? In that country, which was in a ferment at that time, the old religion was being questioned under the influence of the advent of Christianity there, advent of modern scientific thinking. So there were many reform movements happening in India at that time, and many of them centered around Calcutta. So a lot of changes going on in the society, in politics, in education, and especially religion. So he started questioning all of that, whether God is something you just believe in. Is it just a mass of rituals? Do you just believe in a doctrine? Do you just read some books, some theories, some speculation? Or can you actually experience God? This is one thing about India, which is now a little more well known nowadays, is that in India it's not just a matter of doctrine. Religion is always realization in India. If there is a God, you must see God. If you have an immortal soul, you must feel that you have this immortal soul, have that experience. So anybody who is spiritual in India, who would consider himself or herself to be spiritual, is basically seeking experience to make it real. Like this world is real, the world of religion also should become real to me. So Vivekananda went around in Calcutta. You had some of the biggest, the top religious reformers there. People were preaching Christianity. There were Hindu reformers preaching a more refined, a more reformed form of Hinduism. There were traditional Hindu teachers. There were Muslims. And so Vivekananda went around asking, Naren went around asking, he would ask, have you seen God? Now that made many teachers uncomfortable. A great reformer looked at him and said, you, my boy, you have the eyes of a yogi. Somebody told him that there is this crazy man who lives in the temple of Dakshineshwar, which is a temple of Kali. In Hinduism, God is worshipped in the male form, God is worshipped as mother in the female form, beyond form, in so many ways. It's a wide spectrum. So one of the forms which is popular in Calcutta, in Bengal, is worship of God as mother. So, and in many forms, one of the popular forms is Kali. And there's this temple of Kali there. Even now it's very popular. I mean, every day you would have thousands and thousands of visitors and serpentine queues, to go to the shrine of Kali. In that temple of Kali, there is this crazy man who is the priest of Kali, but who can answer your queries, who can give you an answer in the affirmative, that if you ask, have you seen God, he can give you an answer which you want to hear. So Naren goes to this person, Ramakrishna, who is a major figure in Hinduism, in Indian religion now, maybe also the major religious figure in 19th century Hinduism, and today, of course. So Naren goes there. It's a momentous meeting because that's the source from which, because of which I'm here today, and yoga is here today, and meditation is here today, and all of these different Eastern philosophies, they all go back to that meeting between this young Western educated college student and this crazy old Hindu master. So he goes and asks Ramakrishna, have you seen God? And for the first time he got a simple, innocent, straight answer. He said, yes, I have seen God. And it's not I've seen him, it would be I've seen her, because for him God was mother. I've seen her just as I see you, only more clearly, he said to Naren. And Naren was entranced. I mean, he had never heard anybody say this with so much simplicity and honesty. And he started going to Ramakrishna, became his disciple. And it was an extraordinary time because Ramakrishna would teach from morning till night. People would come, spiritual practitioners, yogis, scholars, skeptics, big people in society. Some of the foreigners would come also, the strange people from across the seas, the Englishmen and women, they would also come to meet this strange yogi. And he would talk about God, he would go into ecstasies, he would actually speak to God, and he would teach them, the people who surrounded him. And he selected a group of young boys who would later become the first generation of monks in our order. And Naren was their leader of that group. They were college students at that time, teenagers basically. He taught them. He taught them meditation, how to pray, extraordinary stories, Ramakrishna would say that when I sit for meditation, it's like I could actually hear the clacking sounds of my joints locking into place. And until the meditation is done, I cannot move. It's locked into place. He would spend whole nights in ecstasy. So this was the kind of very intense atmosphere into which Naren was thrown. And Naren quickly became the favorite student of Ramakrishna. And they couldn't be more different because Naren was skeptical. Talking with the Divine Mother Kali, he said, you are sick. You're hallucinating. And Ramakrishna would say, but she talks to me, I see her. And Naren would say, yeah, that happens. You think too much about something, you become a monomaniac and you get these hallucinations. But he said that two things pulled him. One was, this person practiced what he preached. He clearly, tremendous renunciation. He didn't care for anything worldly. And people said that he couldn't even touch money, coins. Naren, not to take anything for granted, one day when Ramakrishna was away from his room, he put a coin under the mattress. And then later when Ramakrishna came back into the room, he sat on that and sprang up as if, stung by a scorpion. And he said, I don't know what's going on, what's wrong? And then Naren, of course, rolled up the mattress and sheepishly showed him that coin. He wanted to see, actually it happens. I mean, believe it or not, but these are the things which were recorded by so many people. And his ecstasies were incredible. He would forget, he would completely be oblivious of the world outside. When people would sing and dance in the name of God, he would get absorbed in mystic trances. He would have visions of God. And there are pictures. There are a few pictures of Ramakrishna, if you Google, they're very famous now, including, and they're all in his trance state. One picture is very famous, where he's sitting. That's the picture which is now worshipped across the world. He's sitting, and that was taken with the help of Naren, because he got a photographer. He said we should have pictures of this person. Because photographing now, not selfies or stuff like that nowadays. It's so easy. It's too easy now. And those days you had to pose and sit, and the person would come with this big contraption and would throw a black cloth over the head and make you pose and then take a picture. It was a big job. And Ramakrishna was like guileless like a child. Naren said, just sit here, you don't have to do anything. He sat in meditation, and he wouldn't want the picture to be taken. So Naren said, don't worry, I'll speak to him about God, and he will go into meditation and he'll forget the world, then you can take a picture. And that's what happened. That's the picture. You can easily see that. And the funny thing about the picture is, he's sitting for meditation. I mean, he's sitting absolutely oblivious of the world. You can see, absolutely inward. What he is seeing. He's seeing God, but God knows what he's seeing. But something inside, and not the world. You can see that. And then the photographer, he goes forward to, he sees that his head is a little bent forward. So he wants to lift the head. And he touches Ramakrishna's chin to lift the head. And to his, he was stunned to see the whole body float off the ground, into the air. And Naren rushed forward and said, what are you doing? Don't touch him. Just put him down and take the picture. And that picture is very popular. You can just, if you Google Ramakrishna, that's the one which comes up first. But there are other pictures of Ramakrishna, and an unearthly delight you can see on his face in those ecstasies. It was not for long, and Naren was skeptical. He questioned. Many years later, when one of his disciples, an Irish lady, Margaret Noble, she questioned him very closely and said, I hope you don't feel bad that I'm asking you all these questions. He said, I questioned and doubted my master for 6 long years. And as a result, he picked up a pebble and he said, I'm as hard as this. I know every inch of the way. Let none feel bad that they doubted. And he would encourage people to ask questions when he was here. To cut a very interesting story short, finally, Sri Ramakrishna passed away. He had developed cancer of the throat, but he went on teaching every day from morning till night. He wouldn't turn anybody away. Vivekananda said we couldn't protect him because he gave of himself freely. As long as the body lasted, he kept teaching. Even when in his lifetime, he was regarded as an incarnation of God. Like Jesus is regarded as the Son of God. In Hinduism, you are not limited to one incarnation of God. There have been many, and there will be many in the future. That's what Hindus believe. And Ramakrishna, in his lifetime itself, is regarded as an incarnation, an avatar of God. Thanks to Hollywood, the term is popular now. More or less in the same sense as you have avatars. You're taking a body, a separate body, and appearing. So God appears among everybody, the body. And today, of course, millions of people in India, tens of millions of people regard him as an avatar. He passed away by throat cancer, but he made Naren the leader of those disciples. And so Naren gathered these young people around him and started the first Ramakrishna monastery. And they got a house, they said, at cut rates because it was supposed to be haunted. So nobody wanted to stay in that house, so they got it cheap. And they started the first monastery. That house has been pulled down, but we have the monastery there now. And they spend their time in meditation, in study. Incredible. They hardly had any clothes to wear. They had only one set of formal clothes to wear, and they would stay in the house in loin cloths, and that set would be used by anybody who would go out of doors into the city. There were 16 of these disciples, including Naren, and they decided to become monks. And it was very interestingly Christmas Eve, when at night, when they were sitting around a fire, and they decided that just like the apostles of Christ, they would become monks and try to realize God in their own life as shown by their master, and also spread these teachings all over India and the world. And so that became the first group of monks. And they went all over India, except one who remained in the monastery, Ramakrishnananda, who stayed there with the worship and kept the monastery alive. But the others wandered like traditional Indian monks. Even now, you will have thousands of these monks who are like wandering philosophers, teachers. They beg for their food. They live under trees sometimes in a temple, sometimes in an ashram, and they move from place to place and teach. Vivekananda traveled all over India. In fact, later in the complete works of Vivekananda introduction, Margaret Noble, she writes, these are the 3 sources of Vivekananda. One is Ramakrishna, his master. The second one is Vedanta, the philosophy of Hinduism, all these texts which you study, the Upanishads and Gita. And the third one is India herself. He walked all over India, sometimes on foot, sometimes on bullock cart, sometimes by train, and he knew India intimately. So Vivekananda became a sort of miniature India in himself. He stayed in the huts of poor people, he was entertained by princes, rajas, he taught them. There are so many interesting stories. For example, one prince, he was in the court, and that prince did not believe in image worship. That was a big question in India at that time, that should images be worshipped? Is it bad to worship images? Because under the influence of the attacks of Christian missionaries who said that you should not worship images, it's very bad. But Hinduism worship images is very common. And Ramakrishna himself worshipped an image of Kali. And Vivekananda later would say here in America that if worship of images can produce one like Ramakrishna, worship 1,000 images, I say. So the prince asked, why should we worship something made of stone or metal or wood? And then Vivekananda turned to the minister. This is a minor king, so turned to the minister and said, there was a portrait of the king there. And he said, bring down that portrait. They brought it down, and he said to the minister, spit upon it. And the minister says, how can I? What are you saying? It's sacrilege. It's the portrait of His Highness. He said, but it's just paper. And then the prince or the king, he saw the error of his ways. He said, yeah, it represents God. So it's not that you're worshipping metal or stone or wood, but you are using it to worship God. That way, he taught. There's a famous story of how the traditional Indian dancing girl who was singing, and Vivekananda as a monk, he said, I will not, he was a strict, very moral and very rigid, very ethical person. He said, I will not listen to the singing of a dancing girl. And he was about to walk out. And then he heard her singing a very a classic, come, song which says that, thou, my Lord, you look upon all alike. The one piece of metal is the image of Krishna, which is worshipped in a temple, and another piece of metal may be the knife of a butcher, but it's the same metal. So yes, basically that I may be a dancing girl and you may be a monk, but we have the same divinity within each of us. And when he heard that, he turned around and he came back and he begged her forgiveness. So there's so many very interesting stories about Vivekananda, and nowadays even children know the stories. He's become a legend in his country. But it so happened that he heard a World Parliament of Religions is going to be organized in Chicago, where delegates of different countries would come. So, and he had a vision of Ramakrishna walking across the waves in the Indian Ocean, a vision, and asking him to follow. So he felt that maybe this is a sign that he should go outside India to teach. And there were some people who gathered around and said, you should go out and represent Hinduism in this World Parliament of Religions, in this very strange and distant land. By the way, even now to some extent, but at that time certainly, all white people are Englishmen for them. Because that's whom they saw, the British who were the rulers in India. So you go to the land of the Englishmen, America basically. And he decided, all right, he would go, and others encouraged him. They raised the money for him and all of that to buy a ticket for him on the ship to come to the United States. And that's how in 1893 he became the first Hindu monk and genuine Hindu teacher to come to the West. Remember, it's a big deal for the Hindus because they had many social restrictions, one of which is you should not travel outside India. So anybody who travels outside India, crosses the oceans, is they're outcasted. You're not part of civilized society anymore, and people are not going to you become less than a foreigner. At least the foreigners they live in, that's their country, but you are no longer part of civilized Hindu society. It's not there. It's long gone. But Vivekananda was one of the first to break those taboos. He paid for it. But then he traveled to the United States in 1893 by ship and landed in Vancouver. They have a little Vedanta society in Vancouver, and they are mightily irritated at Chicago and the United States because since Vivekananda landed here first, everybody speaks about Chicago and the World Parliament of Religions, but Vivekananda came to this country first. He finally came to Chicago, World Parliament of Religions, 1893, to represent Hinduism. He lost all his credentials. I think he lost most of his luggage or something. He was very unworldly. And he came with this gorgeous red coat and a big turban, and he was chased in the streets by street kids who threw stones at him and made fun of him and tugged at his turban or something. But he made an impression, and there were a lot of people who helped him. Some people took him in kindly, and they realized he was a delegate, he was a foreigner, a delegate to this. There were a lot of foreigners in the city at that time. There's a new book out last year, I think Devil in the White City or something like that, about the World Parliament of Religions, Eric Larson or something. There was a serial killer at Luz and the World Parliament of Religions. Yes, that World Parliament of Religions. Nobody knew about it at that time, but now there's a book out about it. Yes. But it was a big event. Many of the elite, intellectual elite of America were there, and Europe, and of course the religious elite of different countries had come. They gathered in Chicago. He had no credentials, but luckily he had made friends with some professors, Harvard University and different places. They were impressed by his bearing, by his evident knowledge. He was brilliant. One of the professors, John Henry Wright, wrote him a credential. To ask this man for credentials is like asking the sun for its right to shine. Here is a man more learned than all of our professors put together. And so very glowing recommendations. And so they accepted him to give a talk in the World Parliament of Religions. And that part has become legend, especially in India. Every little kid knows the story of how on the 11th of September, that date, 1893, Vivekananda was on and there's a picture of that. There's all the delegates who are going to speak, and in one corner Vivekananda is also there. And he was 29 years old. He had not spoken on a public platform earlier. And here were all these great scholars and leaders of religion and big people. And he was nervous. He was really nervous. And whenever they asked him, you can go up and give your speech now, he'd say later, postpone it. And finally in the afternoon, when he could no longer postpone it, and they sort of forced him to go and give a talk. So he went and he gave a short talk. He started off with Sisters and Brothers of America. Somehow he connected with that audience. And they stood up and applauded for a long time. Somehow he connected very deeply, heart to heart. And after that, whatever he said was gold. The first speech, and then after that, it so happened that nowadays, if you look back at the World Parliament of Religions, one name that comes out to you from 1893 is Vivekananda. The World Parliament of Religions was revived in 1993, 100 years after that. And now, this year, it's going to be held in Toronto in November. So it's still going on. After that, what happened was a group of Americans, New Yorkers, got him and said, you have to come to our city to teach. And he decided to come to New York, and that's how he came here, and he started the first Vedanta Society in New York in 1894. That's where I am at the first location was actually here, 33rd Street. And they rented 2 rooms, and Vivekananda came here to teach. There are delightful descriptions of him teaching here. He liked small groups and how he could pour out his heart teaching Vedanta and meditation. This is where he wrote that classic, the first manual of the classic Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the first good English translation by a person who was himself enlightened. The lady who took down notes, she wrote, they used to have the pen. She said, I would keep the pen dipped in ink, ready for him. He would sit in meditation, take up one of the texts, the sutras, and meditate upon it. And then he would burst forth with eloquence, and I had to be ready to take it down. And a long time where I would sit quietly, but he not daring to breathe, but he would be in deep meditation. So that's how the book was written, Raja Yoga. It's called Raja Yoga. It was published from New York for the first time. He has other books too, Karma Yoga, also from New York. After New York, there are descriptions like Josephine MacLeod. This lady, she was a socialite who moved in high circles and a very well-to-do lady, and she attended Vivekananda's classes, and she has left a nice description. She said, I went to hear it, and what a sight it was. This quaintly dressed, much more quaintly than I am, at least nowadays people are used to this. Imagine somebody dressed like this in 1894. Indian who comes and starts speaking, and the room, it's a small room and packed. She said that the arms of the sofa, the carpet, the wash basin, and the overflow outside in the hallway and the stairwell, people packed and all not daring to breathe, hanging on to every word that fell from his lips breathlessly. And he would sit in meditation, and he would be lost in meditation. And he, like time would fly. Others would start shifting a little bit, and he would be so absorbed in, and he would later regret it. He would say, I would rather be a teacher than a yogi. And he would tell people to arouse him from meditation, but if he got too absorbed in it. And Josephine MacLeod writes that the first word I heard from Vivekananda was, to me, the truth. The second thing I heard from him was the truth. And the third thing, and for 7 years I heard this man teach, and for me it was nothing but truth all along. She became a very close follower of Vivekananda. From New York, Vivekananda went to, so he started this teaching meditation. Meditation classes became very popular. When the World Yoga Day started 3 years ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the World Yoga Day, and the reporter wrote that many people do not know there was this monk in 1894, more than 100 years ago, who brought meditation practices, yoga and all of this to the West, and that was Vivekananda. She wrote about that. He traveled from New York across the country. He praised New York. He said he praised New York for its liberalism. He praised New York because he said people here are serious. What they take up with a purpose. And he said New York is the head, hand, and purse of America. He met. He didn't meet with financial success, though he met some very rich people. The John Rockefeller, and he persuaded Rockefeller to charity. Later on, became a great all of these Rockefeller foundations and so on. Anyway, he met, for example, the World Parliament of Religions. There's an account of Tesla, the scientist, who had his pavilion. Edison had his pavilion to demonstrate electricity. Tesla had his pavilion, and Tesla would apparently lock up his pavilion and come to listen to Vivekananda's talks in the World Parliament of Religion. And the organizers, whenever they would see the hall emptying, how many talks on religion can you take in a day? So people would get up and start walking out after some time. He would just announce that there's going to be a talk by Vivekananda at the end of this, and people would come back and sit for that. Tesla would come. Tesla had a very interesting correspondence with Vivekananda. Those letters are now preserved in the Tesla Museum about science and philosophy, and Indian philosophy. Very interesting correspondence. Tesla would come and stand in the back and listen. William James became close to Vivekananda, Professor William James. In his classic, The Varieties of Religious Experience, William James quotes Vivekananda and mentions him in that book. Vivekananda traveled extensively across the country. He met Sarah Bernhardt. People don't know about her now, but she was the leading opera singer at that time. She became a disciple. She was suicidal, but she came to Vivekananda, and Vivekananda inspired her. He would impart strength. When you would meet Vivekananda, I can put it no better than Josephine MacLeod's own words. She said that I've met some great people in my time. At that time, I'd met the Tsar of Russia. This was before the revolution. And I felt, when I met the Tsar of Russia, I felt how great he is, how insignificant I am. But when you meet Vivekananda, when I met Vivekananda, I felt how great he is and how great I am. That's what he would bring out in people, a sense of strength, of confidence, of their inner glory and goodness. He would really transmit it across to people, and awaken it in the hearts of people. Vivekananda had his own unique take on everything. Humility. What is? How can you be humble? And humility. How do you practice humility? He said, humility does not being a doormat. Humility means seeing the greatness in the other person. So you see, that's how he would see things. He traveled extensively across the country, lecturing throughout the week, every day. Very interesting experiences in Texas. There was a group of cowboys who wanted to put him to the test. This became as part of the Vivekananda legend now. And they started shooting at him, not to hit him, to scare him, to see whether he gets rattled. But he went on delivering his talk anyway. And so they saw that this is a guy who, they were impressed. This is the guy who really means what he says. Then he traveled to the West Coast also, went back to India. By the time the news of his success in the West was filtering back to India, remember this was long before the internet and Twitter and all of that, he was given a royal reception in India. A few Americans, brave Americans, accompanied him back to India. So he was given a royal reception across India, and he spoke from Sri Lanka through the south of India to the north of India, giving talks in different places in India. Went back to Calcutta, the main monastery there, established the main monastery now on the bank of the river Ganga in a place called Belur. And if you Google it, Belur Mutt, Mutt means monastery. It's spelled the same way as math, M-A-T-H. He established it there. And that's our main monastery. And I tell them, we are older. New York is first, 1894. You came only in 1898. In India, his message was different. In America, his message was spirituality. He said that the people of the West, he wanted a transfer of ideas and ideals. He said people here need spirituality, need peace of mind, need this message that there is something beyond matter. There's something transcendent. That religion is not just talk and belief, it's true. That the spirituality is true, and that everybody needs it. It's not just for monks or forest dwellers or people sitting in caves, but it's for everybody. He called it practical Vedanta. In India, it was just the opposite. He carried the message of in America, he was impressed by the energy here, the confidence in the Yankee, the confidence in the Yankee that we can change things, we can make society better. He was very impressed by the women of America. He praised the women of America endlessly, and he asked for their help in starting schools for girls. So he was not just a spiritual teacher, he was a huge effect on the society of India. He brought back the message of equality. It's a very hierarchical society in India and rigid. The caste system, it may not make much sense to you here, but it had become a great social evil in India. Rigidity, a few of the elite monopolizing all rights, the lower classes who would slog in poverty generation after generation, no dignity, and very hierarchical, with the Brahmins at the elite at the top and the Shudras, the laborers at the bottom, and so on. So he brought back the message of human dignity, of equality, of people of all classes, equality of men and women. I'll give you one example. It's many stories are there. One example is there was, for example, at that time, girls were married off at a young age, and if their husbands died, they would remain widows, and widows were not permitted to remarry in traditional Hinduism. So it was considered you marry only once. And they were condemned to a life of poverty and misery for the rest of their lives. So there were Hindu reformers who said that no, girls should be allowed to remarry. And there were conservative people who said girls should not be allowed to remarry, and so on. Vivekananda, of course, that was the big issue at that time. Is it so? Should widows? By the way, it's all right now. Everybody can do what they please now. But at that time, it was a big issue. Should widows be allowed to remarry or not? So the progressives said yes, and the conservatives said no. And they are, of course, all men. Nobody even thought about asking the women. Vivekananda was asked, obviously it was a big issue of the time, so he asked, what is your opinion? A newspaper reporter asked him, should widows be allowed to remarry? And his answer was strange. He said, am I a widow that you're asking me? He was taken aback. What do you mean? Either yes or no. He said, no. Give women, give girls the same opportunities that are given to men. Give them education and freedom, then they will decide what they want to do with their lives. And you know, many years later, just about 10 years ago, I heard this talk by a professor, a professor of social history, giving a talk in one of the colleges there in Calcutta, and she was saying that, do come in, yeah, come on. She mentioned this. She said that it's interesting that this huge issue of whether widows should be allowed to remarry or not remarry, nobody ever asked the widows themselves, nobody asked the women. There's only one voice she managed to recover from old magazines, that a widow, a lady who wrote in a magazine. He said, she writes, I hear men telling me I have no right to remarry. I hear men telling me I have every right to remarry. Nobody asks me, what do I want? See, it's not something that's evident to men. Because they think in binaries that, yes, either you marry or you do not marry. She says, if you asked me, I would say, when I was married, I was under the domination of one man, my late husband. And when you ask me, if you don't allow me to remarry, I go back to my father's house and I'm under the control of my brothers or the other male members of my family. If I am allowed to remarry, I go under the control of another man. But I don't want any of that. I want freedom and education and the right to live my own life. You'd say that's a no-brainer, but that's only a no-brainer today, and it's a no-brainer for women. It was not a no-brainer for men at that time. You see, at that point, Vivekananda said exactly the same thing, which people at 100 years later seem to think it's common sense. He said, give women education, give them freedom. He encouraged one of his disciples, an Irish woman, Margaret Noble, who later came to be known as Sister Nivedita, to start schools for girls. And she struggled. She literally gave up her life for women's education in India. And she encouraged education across the board in India. And she is regarded as a great hero there. In fact, one of the big bridges across the river Ganga in Calcutta, there are two big bridges. One old one, which is sort of dilapidated now. It's called the Vivekananda Bridge. And the one next to it is a spanking new, shiny, huge bridge, recent bridge. It's called the Nivedita, Sister Nivedita Bridge. So that's the master and disciple, you see. He came back to the United States briefly in 1899, established the Vedanta Society on the West Coast in San Francisco. He said that I will not live to see 40. He went back to India, and some of his letters are very touching. That I am preparing for death. Somebody wrote to him about issues regarding the monastery and the monks, and he said, my mind is no longer in such things. I'm preparing for death. My mind wanders now. I am work and the spreading the message of Vedanta and the monastery and reformation, social reform in India, uplifting India, awakening India, all these are fading away now. I am once again that young boy sitting at the feet of my master in the Kali temple of Dakshineshwar. By the way, as a prize for his coming to this country, crossing the oceans, he was boycotted by the priests in Dakshineshwar, where he spent his most precious years learning from his teacher. Never again in his life was he allowed to enter the temple again. So he would stand on the other side of the river, looking at the spires of the temple, and he said, now I am again that young boy sitting at the feet of Ramakrishna. And he writes, I come. And he selected a date for his passing away. Nobody thought he would. He was only 39. He asked, the Hindus have these almanacs. Each day has its good and bad points, and like holy or. So he asked one of his disciples, tell me about this date and that date and that date. And finally he selected one date and said, okay, stop. That happened to be the 4th of July. And he wrote a poem to the 4th of July. He loved America for the spirit of freedom, for the spirit of equality, human dignity. And he selected that day. On the 4th of July, 1902, in the evening, around exactly this time, he sat down for meditation. When they came to look for him, he had passed away. So they were 39 years old that time. And he was right, he didn't live to see 40. But his legacy is tremendous. I mean, I'm here because of that. And if you search Vivekananda on the net, you will get hundreds of thousands, millions of hits. And in India, it was the turning point. Many of the social reforms after him, till today, they are inspired by Vivekananda. Many spiritual seekers, inspired by, including myself, inspired by Vivekananda, including the present Prime Minister of India, Modi, and many leaders. The first Prime Minister of India, Mahatma Gandhi, he said, my love for India increased 1,000-fold after reading Vivekananda, and so on. So, tremendous effect on India and a continuing effect. And he said, what I have given to this world, it will go on for the next 1,000 years. People will understand more and more, they'll unfold it. That was the life of Vivekananda, told most imperfectly. What did he teach? I gave you an idea of classical Vedanta in the last 3 talks. He gave his own spin on it. He said, first of all, it has to be practical. Subtle philosophy, metaphysics, all very good. But he said, I do not believe in a religion which promises heaven after death and cannot wipe the widow's tears in this life. Religion must be useful, spirituality must be useful for everybody. He said, I want to bring the Vedanta, the yoga, which was the property of monks in forests and caves. Even now it is, there are monks in forests and caves. But I want to bring that out into the cities and spread it around the world. So he was very much a man of his time, you know. Ancient knowledge locked away in the hands of monks, into the hands of a few Brahmin scholars who, to their credit, they protected it. They cultivated it, but they didn't themselves really practice it. Many of them, they didn't. As a matter of form, they held on to it. But to bring it out and give it to the world at large, methods of meditation, the philosophy of Vedanta, now it's all open to the world now. So he said, I'll do that. Bringing Vedanta from the forest to the cities. I remember one of my friends, a monk. We get trained in the monastery, and the monastery is on the bank of the river Ganga, just opposite a big city, Calcutta. So one of my friends, a monk, after the training, we get sent out to different places. He was being sent to an ashram, which is in the midst of one of India's biggest forests. So he was being sent there. And this Swami, this monk, a friend of mine, had lots of Vedanta books. So I said, what are you going to do with all those books? He said that Vivekananda brought Vedanta from the forest to the cities. I'm taking it back. I'm taking all of this back to that forest. It must be practical, he said, not just theories. And he said spirituality was first practical, then it became philosophy and theory. It's people who actually realized it, saw the truth, experienced it, were themselves blessed by it, and then they taught. The Bhagavad Gita, he points out, it was not taught in an ashram. It was not taught in a lecture hall. It was taught in the middle of a battlefield, in the battlefield of life. He taught that the essence of Vedanta is the divinity within each of us, that we are not mere creatures of flesh and blood. We are not condemned to, we did not begin with the birth of this body. We are not condemned to decay and age and die with this body. We are creatures of spirit. I like this saying very much, not Vivekananda's saying, but I like it very much. It sort of summarizes his teaching. That we think we are human beings in search of spiritual experience. But the truth is, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. This divinity within each of us, already there, we need to discover it. And Vivekananda said there are different ways of discovering it. All of spiritual techniques, different paths in different religions. He gave a meta-philosophy, an underlying philosophy of all of this. He said you can do it by meditation. And that's where his classic book, Raja Yoga, came in. And he was a meditator par excellence. There are descriptions of him in India sitting for meditation under a tree. And if you do that in India, highly not advised, because mosquitoes are going to get you. So he's sitting for meditation there, and his face is black with mosquitoes. He can't feel it. He's so deeply absorbed inside. I'm sure when he comes out, he'll feel it. But when he's there, and I can tell you, I can testify to how difficult it is. One mosquito is enough to ruin your meditation. So, meditation is a path. When you calm down your mind sufficiently, Vivekananda used a very beautiful lake metaphor. Imagine your mind is like a mountain lake. And all these thoughts, feelings, ideas, memories in your mind are like ripples and waves on the surface of the lake. If you can calm all of it down, absolutely calm water of the lake and crystal clear water of the lake, you can see straight through to the bottom. I've seen this in Himalayan lakes. It doesn't even look like there is water. It's so still and glass-like. If you throw a coin down there, one monk told me, if you throw a coin down there, you can read up the denomination of the coin from above the lake. It's so clear. When you can make your mind like that through meditation, and there are techniques of meditation. He shared it here. And you realize that divinity within. You are not the body, not the mind, that immortal consciousness shining through body and mind, that you are. Another way he taught was the way of philosophical inquiry, which I talked about in the last 3 talks, where you actually inquire using your intellect and understanding in this situation, and you arrive at the truth. Another path he taught was the more well-known path of love, of bhakti, of devotion to God. Hinduism has a very well-developed bhakti tradition in many forms, many mythologies, many stories, many personalities, many deities, whether it is Shiva or the ascetic sitting on a mountain top, whether it is the Divine Mother, Durga or Kali or Saraswati, whether it is Ganesha. And I saw Ganesha is popular in the United States. I never thought that would be. It is the most, it's very exotic. A pot-bellied, elephant-headed god. And yet, I asked in California, how is it that Americans like Ganesha? And he said, who doesn't love an elephant? Elephants are cute. So, path of devotion, where it starts with faith and how you cultivate love of God. That's another path he taught, Bhakti Yoga. And the path of work, which is something he emphasized. He taught Vedanta as a call to action, not running away from action. He said famously that he who runs away from life to meditate and die in a Himalayan cave has missed the way. He who plunges headlong into the vanities of life has missed the way too. Now that's weird. If you run away from life, you have missed the way. If you plunge into life, you have missed the way. Then what is the way? He said the way is to deify life itself. It is to find God with whomever you are, wherever you are, to find God in everything and in everybody. So he taught the way of action, especially in India. That why only in a temple? He said, my God, the sick, the ill, the hungry, my God, the poor, my God, the wicked. You can serve people, those who need. There is God in front of you, and you can serve God. You can spiritualize your life by serving humanity. There's this whole thing about the cow worship, one of the exotic aspects of Hinduism. He was dead set against it. When he went back to India, there's a group of people who came and said, we have started a cow protection society. Could you help us financially? And he said, the place you come from, people are dying of famine. There is a shortage of food. Why don't you take care of people first? And they gave a very classic old school karma answer. Oh, people are dying because of their bad karma. We need to protect the cows. And cows are our mother. And Vivekananda said, yeah, who else could have sons like this, like you? He said, it's good. You protect cows and animals and everything, but first serve the sick and the hungry and the ignorant. So he engaged his monks that start schools for the illiterate, establish hospitals for the sick, give food to the hungry. And so our order, for example, is known for its huge, widespread charitable activities. We don't call it charitable activities, we call it service as spirituality. He used a phrase given by his master, Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva, which means worship God through service to sentient beings. You're worshipping God when you're serving sentient beings. You see God in sentient beings. So the four paths, the path of knowledge, the path of meditation, the path of love, and the path of service. And this is the kind of spiritual practice he taught his disciples, many of whom went on to become leading spiritual teachers in India and also later on in the West. That's the legacy of Vivekananda. I could go on, it's my favorite subject, but I've run out of time. We could have a conversation if you have questions, comments. In fact, I was thinking, do I have a picture of Vivekananda to share? You can pass this around. I have a tiny picture of Vivekananda. The one with the turban on the left is Vivekananda, one in center is his master, Sri Ramakrishna, and one on the right is Sri Ramakrishna's wife, who was regarded as a saint in her own right, Sarada Devi. Yes.
So was the one who wrote Yogananda, was he related at all?
Yogananda came a few decades after Vivekananda. Yogananda Paramahamsa, he was also a monk of a different lineage, and he came to the United States about, I think in the 1920s or 30s. And I don't know, I think he started out in the West Coast. His book, Autobiography of a Yogi, became very popular. Yeah. He met many of the disciples of Vivekananda, those who were there in India and also who were here. In fact, there is one person who just goes by the name M. Mahendranath Gupta, who wrote what is called the Gospel of Ramakrishna. The teachings of Ramakrishna, he collected them. So Yogananda met M when Yogananda was a student. The story is, it's there in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. In fact, it's there in the Autobiography of a Yogi. There's a picture of M there. He's a very sage, like a long white beard and that kind of. So Yogananda went to M and asked for his blessings, because by that time already M was regarded as a saint and an enlightened person, and said, can I have a vision of the Divine Mother? And a few days later, actually he had a vision. Yogananda had a vision. And later he went back to M, and M asked anxiously, did anything happen? And Yogananda played it cool. He said, no, nothing happened. And M smiled and said, oh, you mischievous boy. He knew that he had the vision of the Divine Mother. And Yogananda himself reports it in his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. There's a new book out about him. Phil Goldberg has written a new book about Yogananda, which I think he's launching at the Open Center tomorrow, or today or tomorrow maybe, here in New York.
Did he ever get married?
Vivekananda didn't. He was a monk, but Ramakrishna was married, and their marriage life was interesting to say the least, because they didn't have any children. It was never a physical relationship, Ramakrishna and his wife Sharada Devi, but they had a very spiritual kind of marriage. So she is regarded as the mother.
So that's these two ladies next to him?
No, that is Ramakrishna and Sarada Devi next to and so Sarada Devi was Sri Ramakrishna's wife, and she is regarded as the Holy Mother. In fact, if you go to the main monastery, she is actually a little more popular than Ramakrishna. You will see there's a big temple of Ramakrishna, and there's a much smaller temple of Sarada Devi, and you will see most people actually go there. She is regarded as a great spiritual teacher and a saint, and as an incarnation of the Divine Mother. If you Google Sarada Devi, you will get a lot about. And Vivekananda actually, it didn't turn out so in his lifetime, but he said that first a place for mother and her daughters, then for father and his sons. So he first wanted a place where women could get together and be nuns or be spiritual practitioners, a nunnery, a convent for women. He wanted to establish that. And that happened finally, but much later. Now there are nuns in our order, and they are centered around Sarada Devi. Like our order is sort of centered around Sri Ramakrishna. Their lives are very interesting, if you read their lives. She outlived both Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. She lived up to 1920, and she became a guiding force in the order. In fact, there are many interesting stories of relationship between her and Vivekananda. Vivekananda was a very strong-willed person, as you can imagine. He was a leader and founder of this big monastic order, and an inspirer and teacher of princes and all these strange people across the oceans. And she was a simple village woman. But he had tremendous regard for her. One word from her and he would never argue. Nobody could get the better of him except her. So there was this, once in the monastery, there was this worker who was caught stealing. And Vivekananda had him thrown out of the monastery. And he went straight to Sarada Devi, who lived in her own ashram across the river in the city of Calcutta. And when another monk, Premananda, went to that ashram, Sarada Devi said to this monk that, look what Vivekananda, Naren, what he has done. This poor man, I know he was stealing, but if you throw him out, he has a family to feed. What else is he going to do? But he's just going to go on stealing now. I mean, there's nowhere to go. Just forgive him and take him back. And Premananda said, I can't do that. Swami Vivekananda has thrown him out. If I go back, I'm going to catch an earful from him. He is not going to take it kindly if I take this man back. She said, just say that I said so. Then he crossed the river back again to the monastery with that person, that worker. And who would he run into? But the first person he ran into was Vivekananda. And Vivekananda glared at him and said, you brought him back? And Premananda said, look, he went to the mother, Sarada Devi, and she said you should take him back. And Vivekananda burst into laughter, and he said to that man, oh, you went to the Supreme Court straight away. Now I can't do anything, you have to come back. When he had the vision, in fact, you might in one way say that Sarada Devi is the one who sent Vivekananda to this country, because when he had the vision of Ramakrishna walking across the waves, he thought it's just a vision. I mean, is it really true, or I'm just imagining things? So he wrote to Sarada Devi that people are saying there's this big thing happening across the oceans, and I had this vision, but should I go? Because crossing the river, oceans and going outside India was a big thing. Should I go, and to what purpose? And she said, yes, you must go. This is for you. So he came. So she was behind this. He writes very touchingly. He said, when Ramakrishna was dead and gone, we were just a band of young boys. Nobody cared for us. Society wanted to crush us out of existence. And there was only one person who kept the faith. There was this lady, this widow, the widow of Ramakrishna, who was herself without any means, but she never lost faith in us, especially faith in him. But she would have no fear of contradicting him. Once, he had a great heart. Once, there was the plague in Calcutta, and people were dying like flies, dropping dead. And Vivekananda immediately organized relief activities. And his Irish disciple, Margaret Noble, she went down into the streets of Calcutta, sweeping, cleaning. It's a matter of hygiene, and so to fight against the plague there. And people saw that this group of monks, led by this white lady from across the oceans, she is risking her life to save us. So they also organized into groups, and anyway, they fought against the plague. And Vivekananda said that, why do we need a monastery? We are traditional monks. We can live under a tree. Let's sell this monastery. Let's sell these grounds of the monastery and use the money to serve the people who are dying in the city. When the word of this went to Sarada Devi, she said, tell him it doesn't belong to him. He can't sell it off. Will it all be finished in one plague relief? This is meant for the centuries to come. You can't sell it off and finish it off in just, in one kind of social action there. And she was strict. She said it belongs to me, to Ramakrishna and to me, the monastery, the whole movement, not to him. He can't sell it off. He wanted to do it out of the bigness of his heart. But you see, her steadiness, she had a vision across centuries. And she would say things, she would be the mother, She would say to people that, tell all those who have come here, those who are going to come here, and those who have not come, I am the mother for all of them. And then she would say that, always remember, whatever happens in life, you have a mother. Yes, so she would say that. And that's why people in India, they identify her with God, with the Divine Mother, with the Mother of the Universe. Some of her disciples asked, what kind of, are you really my mother, or it's like a formal way of addressing you, like you are the wife of my guru, or, like a spiritual teacher? She said, no, I am not like a stepmother. I am not because I'm the wife of your guru. I am really your mother. I am the real mother. So especially when people are in trouble, you'll find a lot of people in her temple, little temple there. They go there to weep. That's something that's very interesting. Like they just sit quietly and they have some prayer. The belief is that because the father is a little tough, but her mother is soft, and she'll give you if you really want it. Sri Ramakrishna knew that. Sri Ramakrishna said, what have I done? You have to do much more. He told her. And she said, I'm a woman. What can I do? And she was very soft and gentle. She said, no, you'll have to do much more than me. And she said, look after the people of Calcutta. Calcutta is the city just across the main monastery. So it's a big city there. So look at the people of Calcutta. They are struggling like insects and worms. They suffer and die like that. They're in lives in the world. They're in so much suffering. Look after them. And so that's why we think all the temples face inwards, but the mother's temple is facing the river, so that the picture of the mother which is put in the temple there, it looks out across the river to Calcutta. Now Calcutta represents the world, this modern world. Yeah. It's very beautiful. She was gentle. Ramakrishna was in ecstasies, gave talks. Vivekananda lectured, wrote, books are there. He traveled across the world. She was very quiet, very gentle, like the morning dew. But in one sense, she was probably more powerful than all of them. I have seen senior monks of the order. When you become a monk, you're attracted by Vivekananda. As you progress in life, you begin to see the greatness of Ramakrishna. And towards the sunset end of the life, when you matured, I see them, they're more attracted to the temple of the mother of Sarada Devi. Vivekananda used to say, about the mother, I'm a little fanatical. Say what you will of the old man, Ramakrishna, but about the mother, I'm a little fanatical. Yes. Very good. Isherwood book, I would recommend that. If you want the story, it's Ramakrishna and His Disciples by Christopher Isherwood. He's a great novelist. He was inspired by the Swami in Hollywood. Prabhavanandaji, the Vedanta Society of Southern California. So he wrote this book, Ramakrishna and His Disciples. Wonderful book. It starts off with a story of a phenomenon. It's a story of a phenomenon. And many people in India now know him because of that book. But when he first wrote it, he was part of the cool set at that time in the 1950s, 60s here, and a novelist. And many people, especially in India and us in the order and we, the devotees, people don't know the price he paid for it. He's regarded very highly among the devotees, among the people in the order. But I read the reviews, New York Times, that time here, of the book, and they all regretted that such a talented person, he's become they didn't say so in so many words, a religious nut now. Why is he involved in this strange Hindu cult or something like that? They sort of thought him a lost case, but he went ahead and did it anyway.
Also, have you read Swami the Cauliflower?
Yes, that's the newest book. I haven't read it. It's on my to-do list. It's on my table. It's Nicola Harding.
I don't remember, but it's
Nicola Baker.
Yeah, it's really good.
Nicola Baker. She wrote this.
Not from the standpoint of a devotee. It's
No, it's
kind of like an admirer.
yeah.
It's really.
She wrote it herself. So there are, even now, that's another thing. There's a huge literature on Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, and books are being written every year, even now.
Those two really hold up as novels in their own right. Written by writers. Really good.
Good literature, really good literature. Yeah, very well written. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me close with the closing chant. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu. Very good.